Have you ever to where you hear a statement being made that you think is so outlandish that it can't be true? I mean, you almost try to give the benefit of the doubt because you don't believe anyone would be so foolish to make such a bold statement. Even the headline just seems outlandish. Listen to this. According to express.co.uk, trans women who were born men now cheered for saying women should be harmed.
No, if you see a TERF, punch him in the f***ing face!
See, these are the kind of articles that catch my attention because immediately when I read it, I try to give the benefit of the doubt and say, well, there has to be more context to this story. It can't just be what the headline is alluding to. So I start reading, and that's what we're going to do here. So for those of you that haven't been familiarized with this story, don't worry about it. Let me see if I can bring you up to speed. We're going to go through this article, and then we might comment here and there, but then we're going to offer some commentary on what this article is addressing. But before we get into it, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like and consider subscribing. So it says, in the high voltage world of transgender politics, it can sometimes seem difficult to have a considered conversation, battle lines are drawn and positions hardened, and the polarized feeling that right is on the side of intractable biology or fluid gender choice, or neither, makes it seemingly impossible to have a calm and useful discussion that gives airplay to opposing views. All that entire paragraph was basically just trying to say was, there are two sides that disagree. To continue, it says, however, when activist Sarah Jane Baker spoke at the Trans Plus Pride event in London, the approach to difference of opinion took on a shocking dimension. Baker used her platform to direct the crowd about what to do if they saw a TERF. Let me pause right there. To some of you that might not have ever heard the term TERF, it's spelled T-E-R-F, not T-U-R-F. And it means trans exclusionary radical feminist. There are examples of these. There's a lot more of these than I thought. I even saw a video last week of a trans person that was eating either lunch or dinner, and while the trans person was eating, they were being harassed by a lady that was identifying herself as a TERF.
Trans eccentric radical feminist.
Are you a TERF?
I'm a TERF.
Wow.
Would you like me to move somewhere else? I will.
No, actually, you should tell me about being a TERF.
You're a boy, right?
Now at the time, I had only heard that term in passing, but I had never done any research to look into it, not any bit. And then of course, continuing to watch the video, the trans person complained, the lady got kicked out, and it ended up on YouTube. Now this article clarifies that fact and defines it as a woman whose views on gender identity are considered hostile to transgender people. Listen to that definition again and remind yourself that this is discussing women in regards to how they view transgender individuals. A woman whose views on gender identity are considered hostile to transgender people. So continuing on, she, as in Sarah Jane Baker, told the cheering trans crowd, quote, I was gonna come here and be really fluffy and be really nice and say, yeah, really lovely and queer and gay. Nah, if you see a TERF, punch him in the blanking face. There's a couple of things to take into consideration when you hear that. You're talking about a trans woman who just actively called for violence, hostility towards women. And on top of that, is this your king or your he-queen? But then again, to be fair, I guess I shouldn't really expect anything different from someone who spent 30 years in prison for having kidnapped and tortured their stepmother's brother. Yeah, this is the person that's the advocate. This is the person that's on stage advocating for violence against women. Baker was convicted and behind bars, attempted murder on one of the inmates, and only as of recent in 2019 was let go. So, paid your dues, gotcha. But now, here's Sarah Jane Baker all over again, proposing violence, so not even skipping a beat. And the article continues to say, clearly aware of having such a position of influence, Baker made no attempt to curate the message or to box their passion for the cause in a pacifist way. Instead, she embraced the kind of naked activism that history has repeatedly shown to result in an outpouring of savagery. After all, the Trans Plus Pride event saw thousands march through London in what has been dubbed the biggest ever call for trans rights. To kind of wrap up this article, the event concluded with speeches by activists in Hyde Park Corner. One of them was Baker, who was holding an Antifa flag. The article says, as a concept, it is truly noble in its aim. With its rainbow insignia, LGBT, Pride is a welcoming clarion call for those who once felt on the margins of society to revel in the inclusivity of a pluralist society. Now, in light of all this information, there have been many individuals that have been very outspoken in regards to their disagreement with the movement and the impact that it has on their own gender. I guess one of those that would be familiar would be J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter novels. and even she's had to come out and make the statement that she's been terrified or scared for her family's life and well-being. Okay, so that's the argument in the article. Now a couple of thoughts just to break this down. From the start of this article, you actually immediately get hit with a word, polarized. Two opposite sides vying for truth in this case, and it stands to reason that it would really just come down to a matter of definition. And it's not a matter of definition from what can be proven and what can't be proven. I think there's more than enough information out there that we can actually draw a conclusion. Typically, those with XX chromosomes, we as human beings throughout all history and historical precedents have always defined those individuals by that term, female. And to the opposite, those with XY chromosomes we have always defined as male. What you're witnessing right in front of your eyes is a transitioning of terminology. The biological aspect still remains the same. The chromosomes still remain the same, XX and XY. Now immediately when I say this, someone out there is going to say, well, what about the individuals with XXY or XYX or YXX or something along those lines? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about your average Joe or your average Jane. I'm not talking about Joan. So since the biology for the most part will stay the same unless there's any level of self-interruption, namely puberty blockers or something of the sort, or something else to stop the progress of an innate trait that would be inherited if the person was allowed to develop, so that when they get ready to do their transitioning, the surface may reflect more of what it is that they feel on the inside. And that's why I spoke about that word polarized. It talked about the intractable biology or fluid gender choice. I don't think it's so simple. And the reason why I say this is because I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt in saying that there are some bad actors out there, but I'm not fully convinced that everyone is acting. As in, I'm not just going to render my position to be that everyone is choosing this, whether they act on it or not, whether they live out the way that they feel on the inside or not. Some do, some don't. Some wholeheartedly change their mind as they grow. And then of course what I meant by bad actors is there are just some out there just going with the trend. We covered a story a while back of a person that had committed a crime, had transitioned and wanted to be moved to the female jail. So all that said, I'm leaning on the side of there's still more for me to learn. But when it comes down to the crux of this article, Sarah Jane Baker, I gave myself a little test just to find out how much information could I find about Sarah Jane Baker in 5 minutes. How much influence is this person actually getting and how much media coverage is this person getting? Is there more coverage now within the last couple of days because Sarah Jane Baker made the call for trans women to give women the Mike Tyson treatment? But no, I found a lot. What I saw was interviews. Articles, interviews going all the way up to 2020. Now the reason why that's significant is because Sarah Jane got out of jail in 2019. And I had to ask myself, what former criminal do you know that gets this much coverage after they spend a 30-year sentence? Unless they did something extreme or there was some coverage due to maybe a wrongful jail sentence, then that I understand. But the fascination with this person, even down from 2020, is why this platform was developed, which explains why Sarah Jane Baker was the speaker. And I already mentioned the jail sentence. She spent 30 years in jail for kidnap and then the attempted murder of a fellow prisoner. In 1988, he got his first 7-year prison sentence for beating up his stepmother's brother and kidnapping and torturing that same stepbrother. He's an artist, violinist, author, wrote the book Transgender Behind Prison Walls, and I believe Sarah is about early to mid-50s. So with all of that said, I was still surprised at the comment. However, I think Hyde Park, there's a section in London that they refer to as Speaker's Corner. I haven't done the research to look into it to see just yet if this is that section, but I believe the Speaker's Corner, what they refer to as the Speaker's Corner, is in Hyde Park somewhere. And if that's the case, then I'm really not all that surprised as to why those kind of comments were made and there were no charges pressed. All kinds of people go in that area and say the most outlandish things and nothing happens. It's one of those areas for the old classic soapbox where you can get onto a soapbox and scream to the high heavens or to the low hells, damn near whatever you want. More or less anyway. And make no bets about it, the comments that were made was a call to action. It's a call to violence. In any other circumstance, you would arrest a person like this. The exact quote that was made was, I was going to come here and be really fluffy and be really nice. By fluffy, I'm going to interpret that term as meaning I'm going to be really soft, be really warm, loving, yada yada yada. And say, yeah, be really lovely and queer and gay. Nah, if you see a TERF, punch them in the blanking face. Without anyone else stating it, let me post a question that I know some people are inevitably going to start thinking when they hear a statement such as this one. And it's not a whataboutism, it's more of a flip the role situation, because that is the immediate thought that's going to come to most people's minds. If you were to make this exact same statement, just put it in the reverse, against this community, would there be so much calm? For instance, let's do an example. Let's have two people. Let's call person A Mr. Straight, and person B is Mr. Transformer. Behind Mr. Straight, there are nearly 3 to 4 billion individuals that all think like Mr. Straight for the most part. Now, we're not talking ideologically, we're just talking about classifying themselves as a man in the historical precedent definition. On the opposing side, Mr. Transformer. Now, in case Mr. Transformer does not like the term Mr., we could just say Transformer. Now, if Transformer, and we're taking into consideration the entire population of Transformers, there is less than 5%. In fact, there's less than 1%. It's more like 0.1% of the entire world population. Or let's go up just a little bit. 0.1 to 0.5 of the entire world's population considers themselves Transformers. So at the end of the day, you're really talking about anywhere from 60 million to about 200 million. And I think with those numbers, I'm being generous. So, when addressing the situation of that inevitable question, if you, Mr. Straight, were to call to violence in the same way Transformer called to violence, one group could inevitably do a lot more damage than the other. But I think where I would get some pushback on my argument is that the call to violence wasn't against Mr. Straight, it was against Mrs. Straight.
Well, I was going to come here and be really fluffy and be really nice and say, yeah, be really lovely and queer and gay. No, if you see a TERF, punch him in the f***ing face.
And while some may agree, Mrs. Straight can be very violent at times. Mrs. Straight can even act like a Karen every now and then. Mrs. Straight could be rude, she could be obnoxious, and many times she just can't mind her own business. But it's not very often where anyone in their right mind would immediately call for violence towards them. And that is what's being done here. TERF, which is the next area that we need to dig into. TERF. Trans Exclusionary Radical Females. So this article, I already told you, it made mention of a term. It used the term hostile, and so I was struggling trying to understand where hostility was being denoted in this definition, because it says a person whose views on gender identity are considered hostile. So I thought that this was in just relation to the article. It's actually not. This is almost the definition given everywhere. It's even gotten to the point where some have alluded to the fact that the term TERF is now being referred to as a slur, as in a derogatory slur. To refer to someone as a TERF almost came off, and I hope I'm not being hyperbolic in this, but it almost gave the impression that you might as well just tattoo a swastika on their head. The term hostile in correlation to the term TERF is actually a dictionary definition now. When you look at the word, there are already a number of presuppositions that come attached to that word. So for someone to label you as this one thing, they immediately box you in and isolate you into this corner with everyone else that they've also labeled with this term to mean that you are officially now transphobic. And I would venture to say that they don't stop there. They go further in saying that you mean to do trans people harm. And I think I'm right in this because of the reference to the term hostile. In the definition, which we've read a couple of times now, it says a person whose views on gender identity are considered hostile to transgender people. What do you mean hostile? Hostility can be understood in a few different ways, whether it be understanding our exchange of antagonistic words or unfriendly words or unkind words, or what some would label as hate speech, I guess. But it also does denote violent undertones. And so that's the part that I'm wrestling with this, because if someone is just looking at it from the viewpoint of antagonistic words, that's one thing. But if another group is looking at it as this group over here means to do me harm just by the sheer definition of how they're labeled, then when you recognize that a person may belong to that TERF group, would the reaction not necessarily be that you would then engage in violence? Would that not be the logical conclusion? But from everything that I've seen about the feminist movement, it would seem that they want exclusivity with the one thing they are, women. So let me know what it is that you guys think. Do you believe that on Sarah Jane Baker's part that this was a call to violence, or simple hyperbole? Whatever it is, leave your thoughts in the comment section and I will get at you for the next one. Be easy, y'all.